And Elvis Presley's granddaughter, Riley Keough, is opening up about her plans for Graceland and a promise to her mother.
I think for her, it was this place where she could be like wild and free.
For over 4 decades, the upstairs of Graceland, Elvis Presley's legendary Memphis estate, has been completely sealed off from the world. No fan has ever stepped foot on that floor. No member of the press has been allowed beyond the staircase. Even family members were told, in no uncertain terms, that those rooms were off-limits. Behind those doors lies a mystery, one of the last untouched spaces in American pop culture. And now, finally, someone has gone in. Her name is Riley Keough, actress, producer, and granddaughter of the king of rock and roll. But more importantly, she's the sole legal heir to Graceland and everything inside it. After the death of her mother, Lisa Marie Presley, Riley didn't just inherit a house, she inherited a legacy, complex, heavy, and wrapped in decades of silence. And for the first time, she's beginning to open that silence up. But this isn't a media tour. It's not a Netflix special or a tabloid photo shoot. What Riley discovered behind those locked doors, she hasn't shared to build her brand. She's shared it to make sense of the man behind the myth, the grandfather she never got to meet, but whose presence she's felt her entire life. Most people know Graceland for the Jungle Room, the Elvis jumpsuits, the gold records, and the peanut butter and banana sandwiches. But what's upstairs has remained frozen in time since August 16, 1977, the day Elvis died. His clothes still hang in the closet. His cologne still sits on the dresser. The book he was reading is still on the nightstand. The clock stopped at the exact moment he was found. No cameras, no curators, no curious eyes, until now. So what did Riley see? What was hidden in that space for all these years? And more importantly, what does it reveal about Elvis? Not the icon, but the man. Because if you think you know the king of rock and roll, what his granddaughter uncovered might make you think again. And once you hear what Riley found, you'll understand why those doors stayed locked for so long. Before it became a shrine, before it drew over 500,000 visitors each year, Graceland was just a quiet house on a lonely road outside Memphis. Built in 1939 by a local doctor and his wife, it was dignified but not extravagant, a modest colonial revival home with 10 rooms, white columns, and a wide front porch. It didn't scream celebrity, it whispered sanctuary. By the time Elvis Presley found it in 1957, he was already more than famous. He was a global phenomenon. Just 22 years old, but already exhausted by the cameras, the headlines, the screaming fans who followed him everywhere. What he wanted wasn't more attention, it was a place to disappear. When he saw Graceland, nestled behind a long, tree-lined driveway, he didn't see a mansion. He saw an escape. He bought it for $102,500, roughly $1 million today. Not because it was flashy, but because it was private. It became his castle, but also his cage. Over the years, Elvis transformed Graceland into an extension of his personality. The downstairs became a surreal showcase, loud, colorful, and uniquely him. The famous Jungle Room with its green shag carpet and waterfall wall. The music room with stained glass peacocks. Lisa Marie's bedroom wrapped in pink poodle wallpaper. It was theatrical, even strange, but it was also intentional. Because while the downstairs was made for display, the upstairs was made for retreat. Only a select few were ever allowed past the staircase. Upstairs, Elvis created a world entirely his own, away from the chaos, away from the lights. That's where he read, wrote, prayed, and collapsed under the weight of his own fame. The people closest to him knew, when he disappeared upstairs, you didn't follow. There, He could walk barefoot in silk pajamas, eat in solitude, scribble thoughts in journals by candlelight. He didn't have to smile. He didn't have to perform. Upstairs wasn't for fans. It wasn't even for friends. It was for survival. This physical separation, the curated, crowded downstairs versus the sealed-off upstairs, mirrored the internal split in Elvis himself, the public icon and the private man, the king who ruled a cultural empire, and the soul who longed for silence. Even after his death, the boundary remained. On the day Elvis passed away, his father, Vernon Presley, gave strict instructions. The second floor was to be locked, permanently. He wasn't preserving a museum. He was guarding a memory. That space, he believed, still belonged to Elvis. And for over 40 years, the world respected that boundary. No photos, no tours, no exceptions, until Riley stepped across it. But before we explore what she found, we have to understand what she felt. Because Graceland wasn't just a house. For Elvis, it was a last attempt at peace. For Riley, it was a doorway into a man no one ever truly knew. When Riley Keough stepped beyond the roped-off staircase at Graceland, it wasn't with cameras, journalists, or fanfare. There was no entourage, no performance, just her, a granddaughter crossing into the private world of a man she had only known through stories, photographs, and the echo of a voice the world had once adored. For Riley, this wasn't a celebrity walkthrough. It was something sacred. A promise kept to her mother, Lisa Marie. A personal act of remembrance. A quiet pilgrimage into silence. As she opened the door to Elvis's bedroom, time seemed to bend. The air was still. The lighting dim. The scent of old leather and faint cologne clung to the space like memory itself. Nothing had been touched. His shoes were still under the chair, his hairbrush lay on the dresser, the same bedspread, the same pillow crease. It was as if he had just stepped out of the room and might return at any moment. Riley didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence told her everything. She moved slowly, not as an heir surveying her inheritance, but as a daughter of legacy trying to understand where it all began. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot where history says Elvis took his last breath. But Riley didn't see tragedy. She saw stillness. She saw longing. She felt him. Not the performer, not the legend, just a man. Someone who laughed, who cried, who wrestled with himself when no one was watching. There was something profound about being in a room frozen in time. The audience may never get to stand where she stood, but they can imagine it. That one moment when the past becomes tangible, when absence becomes presence. Riley wasn't there to look. She was there to listen. And in that room, untouched for nearly half a century, she didn't just discover more about Elvis. She discovered something about herself, about grief, about family, about the unspoken pain passed down through generations. Her journey wasn't about uncovering headlines. It was about uncovering humanity. And in the stillness of that sacred space, the story of Elvis Presley, the real story, was finally beginning to whisper. As Riley moved deeper into the upstairs quarters of Graceland, the stillness gave way to something more intimate, the presence of memory itself. What she found wasn't curated or displayed. There were no labels, no glass cases, just untouched artifacts, quietly waiting in the shadows. On the nightstand beside Elvis's bed sat a worn leather Bible, its corners dog-eared, verses underlined in fading ink. Next to it, several small prescription bottles, some still half full. Riley paused. She didn't touch them. She didn't have to. Just their presence told a story. a man looking for peace in Scripture and relief in medication. Then came something unexpected. Tucked just beneath the bed, almost hidden, was a dusty shoebox marked with capital letters. "Do not open." Riley hesitated. For a moment, she questioned whether she even had the right. But something in her heart, a weight she'd carried her entire life, urged her forward. She opened the box slowly. Inside were letters never mailed. One addressed to Lisa Marie, her mother. Another, simply labeled, "To whoever finds this after I'm gone." Riley hasn't shared their exact contents, and perhaps she never will. But she has admitted they changed how she viewed her grandfather. Not as the icon the world worshipped, but as a man haunted by his own fame. These weren't the ramblings of a rock star. They were the quiet prayers of someone yearning for something more. Validation, forgiveness, peace. Beside the box was a spiral-bound journal. Inside, the pages were filled with fragmented writing. Some were full of handwritten prayers. Others looked like thoughts scribbled in the middle of the night, unfinished, raw, real. And then, one page stood out. Just one word, repeated over and over in different sizes, in shaky ink. Free. That word, written dozens of times, struck Riley deeply. Because for all his fame, for all the crowds that screamed his name, Elvis Presley was not free. Not from the pressure. Not from the expectations. Not from himself. And in that moment, Riley understood something few people ever could. Elvis didn't just build Graceland as a home. He built it as a refuge, a place to hide, to heal, to breathe. He wasn't the invincible king of rock and roll. He was a spiritual man, a troubled man, a man slowly being crushed by the weight of a name too heavy for any one person to carry. These letters, the pills, the Bible, they won't be part of a tour. They won't be sold or displayed, but they matter. Because in these shadows, Riley didn't just uncover secrets. She uncovered truth. And in doing so, she reminded us that behind every legend is a human being, quietly hoping to be seen. Just when Riley thought she had seen everything upstairs, the untouched bedroom, the letters, the journals, she noticed something odd. A narrow wall space that didn't align with the floor plan. Barely visible, half hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. A door, small, unmarked. It wasn't mentioned in any blueprints, not by staff, not by family. It was as if this room had deliberately been kept secret, even from those closest to him. With a quiet breath, Riley turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was unlike anything else in Graceland. No bed, no windows, no framed gold records or velvet furniture. Just a single dim lamp in the corner, casting a soft amber glow. The floor was lined with cushions, arranged in a semicircle. In another corner, a white noise machine hummed faintly, as if still trying to drown out the noise of the world outside. No pictures, no mirrors, no distractions, just stillness. Riley knew instantly this wasn't just a room, this was a sanctuary, a place where Elvis came to disappear. She later learned he called it his meditation room, a sacred space where he prayed, read books on God and mysticism, scribbled questions in the margins, and tried, if only for a few minutes each day, to silence the storm inside his mind. The shelves were still there, the books still lined up neatly. Some were worn and weathered, spines cracked, pages full of handwritten notes, titles on energy, faith, forgiveness, theology mixed with spiritual philosophy. In that tiny space, the king of rock and roll was no king at all. He was just a man, alone with his thoughts. No cameras, no screaming fans, no pressure to perform. Just breathe, just being. Riley stood there for a long time, not because the room held something flashy, but because it didn't. And that's what made it powerful. It wasn't a room meant to impress. It was a room meant to protect. Even within the fortress of Graceland, even behind locked doors and velvet ropes, Elvis needed one more boundary, a final retreat, a whisper of peace in a world that demanded noise. Riley didn't say much about how long she stayed there, but she did say this. It felt like stepping into his soul. And maybe, in a way, that's exactly what it was. Even with all Riley Keough has revealed, the bedroom, the journals, the quiet room, one mystery still refuses to die. The tunnel. For decades, whispers have circled Graceland like ghosts. The theory goes like this. Somewhere on the property, hidden beneath the house or near the meditation garden, lies a secret tunnel. A private underground passage Elvis supposedly had built, not for show, but for escape. Some say it connected the mansion to the outer edges of the estate. Others believe it led even farther, to a secret exit through the woods, a back door from a life he could no longer endure. It sounds like fantasy, and yet the theory persists. It began not long after Elvis's death. In 1978, a man resembling him was reportedly spotted boarding a flight at Memphis International Airport under the name John Burroughs, a known alias Elvis had once used. It made headlines briefly, then faded. But to many fans, it was enough to plant a seed. Since then, the sightings have never stopped. Elvis at a gas station in New Mexico, Elvis at a Burger King in Michigan, Elvis in a crowd watching an Elvis impersonator. Most laugh it off, but some wonder. And when Riley was asked about the tunnel, whether she's ever seen one, whether it's real, she didn't give a straight answer. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. She changed the subject. Maybe because it's silly, or maybe because it isn't. But here's the real question. Why do people still cling to the idea? Why, after all this time, does the thought of Elvis faking his death still echo through the hallways of internet forums, books, and documentaries? Maybe it's not about escape at all. Maybe it's about hope. Because after seeing what Riley saw, the medications, the letters, the quiet desperation in his own handwriting, it becomes painfully clear why he might have wanted to vanish. Not because he was a myth, but because he was a man too tired to keep playing one. The tunnel theory will likely never be proven. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe it's not a story we need to fact-check. Maybe it's a story we need to believe. Because the truth Riley uncovered upstairs makes the fantasy feel less far-fetched, and more like something Elvis might have dreamed about. And if he did, maybe we don't blame him. When Lisa Marie Presley passed away in 2023, the world mourned the last direct heir of Elvis Presley. But what many didn't realize was that Riley Keough didn't just inherit a house. She inherited a burden. Graceland isn't just real estate. It's a symbol, a museum, a myth, a pilgrimage site for millions. It's where fans weep at the gates, where tribute concerts echo across decades, and where the ghost of fame still lingers in every shadow. To the outside world, it might have seemed like Riley hit a jackpot. The legal owner of Elvis's estate, the voice of a legacy worth hundreds of millions. But behind the headlines, the truth is quieter and heavier. What Riley inherited wasn't just fame, it was responsibility. Legal responsibility to manage the estate, protect the Presley name, and navigate a world filled with contracts, copyrights, and people looking to profit. Emotional responsibility to guard her family's most vulnerable stories, protect her mother's wishes, and preserve a space that has been sacred for nearly 50 years. And cultural responsibility to make sure that Elvis Presley isn't just remembered as an icon, but understood as a man. She didn't ask for this. She didn't audition for the role. But she's accepted it with grace, and, perhaps most impressively, with restraint. In an age where everything is content, Riley has turned down offers to commercialize what's upstairs. Streaming deals, reality shows, exclusive interviews. Each time, she said no. Because for Riley, some things aren't meant to be monetized. They're meant to be remembered. She's quietly working with archivists, scanning Elvis's handwritten lyrics, preserving unseen letters, cataloging tapes that may never be released. Not for hype, not for headlines, but for history. She's not chasing fame. She's curating truth. And in doing so, she's become more than a granddaughter. She's become the protector of a legacy the world thought it already understood. But through her eyes, through her choices, we're starting to see that legacy more clearly. Not as something frozen in time, but as something still living, fragile, real, and deeply human. In a world obsessed with access, where everything can be streamed, shared, sold, and seen, Riley Keough made a different choice. She opened the doors to Graceland's upstairs not for spectacle, but for understanding. She offered a glimpse, not a tour, a truth, not a performance. And then, just as quietly as she had entered, she let the silence speak. Because some stories are too sacred to exploit. Some rooms are meant to remain untouched. Some legacies aren't built by what we show, but by what we choose to protect. Riley could have turned Elvis's private quarters into a global sensation. She could have opened the bedroom, displayed the shoebox, broadcast the meditation room to millions. But she didn't. Not because there was nothing to see, but because there was everything to feel. In the pages of his journals, in the underlined scriptures, in the word free written over and over, she found more than history. She found him. And maybe that's all we ever needed. We don't need to see the shoebox. We don't need to hear the unreleased tapes. We don't need to walk into the meditation room. We finally understand the man. Not the king, not the myth, but the human being who carried the weight of both. A man who searched for God in quiet corners, who scribbled late-night thoughts he never meant to share, who retreated from fame, not because he didn't love music, but because he was drowning in everything that came with it. Riley's silence is louder than any interview. Her choice to preserve rather than publish is a rare kind of reverence. It reminds us that some truths can't be captured by a lens. They live in stillness, in scent, in shadow, in legacy. And now, that legacy is in the hands of someone who isn't chasing attention, but meaning. So while the upstairs of Graceland may remain sealed to the public, it no longer needs to be unlocked. Because thanks to Riley, we already know what's behind the door. Not just furniture and artifacts, but vulnerability, longing, faith, pain, and above all, love. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do with a secret is protect it. And sometimes, the greatest tribute to a life lived loudly is to let it end in silence.